honored to have you back at Stuart to talk about our inspired community of informed hope. Welcome so much, Suzanne.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's great to see you, Patty. Great to see those of you. This is I go back and forth between using Google and Zoom. So I'm just adjusting my visual here. You know, it's funny, Patty says that the most important job I had was Stuart, because actually I was just talking to the noviceship community this morning, and someone said to me, what was one of your best fun jobs? And I talked about the middle school at Stuart. And Monday, I think it was Monday night, Pam Hayes, who is retiring from the headship at Greenwich, the trustees were feting her, and they asked me to come on and say something because Pam and I go way back. And we talked about Stuart then too, because I was head of middle school at Stuart and she was head of middle school in New York City. And Liz Carr was head of middle school at Greenwich. And we started this, not an exchange program, but that 6th grade would go to one school and 7th to the other and 8th, so that by the end we had all seen each other's schools. So anyway, I love Stuart and it's great to be with you. When Patty, Robert, and I chatted over our second favorite way of talking to each other now, which is email, the first being these wonderful calls, they asked, well, what would you entitle it? And right away, I knew the title should be Stuart, an Inspired Community of Hope. Now, why did I do that? It wasn't just to give you a false compliment, but it is actually out of a recognition of what I have observed. I mean, I've always known that about Stuart, but honestly, in these last 2 months, watching, how have I done that? I look at the school's websites every other week, which means I do 12 a week. And I've just been so impressed by the communication, by the online learning, by the recognition that with each week, as uncertainty grew, and I think some confusion, some like, oh my gosh, when are we going to get back to normal? As that all deepened and we all began to realize, well, this is that expression, the new normal. I never saw anything other than confidence, courage, hope, and a resilience. But it was informed. And I want to stress that. It wasn't one of these false embracing, well, we just got to do it. It was really a great use of the intellectual dimension of one's core in responding to what is objectively a very serious moment in our lives. So the title is on purpose. I have been spending someone asked me, so where are you? So I'm in Washington, D.C., and we are at our mayor has never strictly said sheltered in, but it's obvious that we are to stay at home. And so although I can walk to the Stuart Center, I only go maybe every other week to do checks or check mail. So sitting in my tiny little living room here in a very nice, it's a funny neighborhood I live in, but anyway, it's in the Catholic University section of DC. I've been thinking a lot about this question: whom do we want to be when we emerge from this? Let me repeat the question. Whom do we want to be when we emerge from this experience? On the one hand, we have been in physical isolation. And as I said to a friend of mine the other day, physical isolation is not the best condition for an extrovert such as myself. So I have had to spend some time learning new things about how I understand being present to people. And I've had to say to myself, what am I learning from this experience? What am I so glad I don't have to do ever again? Haven't you all learned things that you once thought so important, and for a variety of reasons, you haven't had to do those things, or you haven't had time to do those things, and you wake up and you say to yourself, hey, I'm so glad I'm not doing that anymore. And aren't you also discovering things about yourself, things that you're choosing to do that you were not doing before that you're so glad you're doing? So, for example, for me, I have 4 siblings. They are all grandparents. One of them lives in England. We don't see each other very often. And now we have bi-weekly Zoom reunions. So when some of you were on as we were warming up, and Nancy Solomon asked me how my family was. And so I have a grandniece who was born on Easter, with my niece going into labor on Good Friday. So we had the introduction of the baby via one of these Zoom reunions. So yes, we're going to continue that because it's fun. And what do I miss? What do I long for the minute this stops? So I think those are important questions, but actually, I think the most important question to be asking is, whom do I want to be when I emerge from this? And that question has taken on a new depth of meaning for me as I, just as you, look at the news in a variety of forms now and realize, actually, this is our new normal. There is going to, not to depress anyone, but we know in the coming year that we are going to toggle back and forth. We don't know the timing of that, but we know it's a reality. So as we think about this, another way of asking the question is, what are the qualitative changes occurring in my core or in my soul or in my heart? How do I see myself as having changed a bit? I don't know about you, but I had to stop for a while because watching the numbers increase of people affected by the virus, people dying of the virus, got to me at one point. And I really appreciated Andre Bocelli on Easter evening speaking about hope. And he said, I have belief in, this is the gist of it. I believe in Christ. I believe that Easter is a celebration of hope and life. So I want to offer this gift to the world. And I remember thinking at the time, wow. So he could see joy in the midst of sorrow. How am I doing that? He saw the possibility of birth. And he speaks about that. He speaks about the Renaissance in that opening talk he gives. But he saw the possibility of birth in the face of loss. So what is it about the way we're living that we can do that? I mean, all of this really has taken a turn for the worse during the Easter season. So we have a choice to make. How do we integrate the truth of the pandemic and the truth of Easter? The truth of loss, the truth of birth, the truth of sorrow, the truth of joy. I was reading this morning a talk that the Superior General of the Jesuits gave, and he said COVID-19 has accelerated the transformation of human life demanded by the changing times we live in. But we still don't know how deep this change will have to be. I've been thinking a lot, and I don't know if there are any students on the call, but I've been thinking a great deal about the seniors, 8th graders, and depending on the design of your school, it could be 6th graders, it could be 4th graders. When I was head of Carrollton, it would have been 3rd graders, 6th graders, and 8th graders, all ending a moment, all accustomed to playing a very special role in end-of-year rituals. And all of those being changed. How disappointing. My heart goes out to them. To the parents of seniors and of eighth graders, my heart goes out to you because you know how hard your daughters have worked for this glorious moment. When we would rehearse for graduation at Carrollton, I would say to the girls, to the young women, remember, when you turn around, having received that diploma, you are to stand for the 10 seconds, not just for your own sake, but for the sake of your parents, who have made such sacrifices for you to have enjoyed this opportunity. You stay there for a few more seconds for the sake of your teachers, who have invested such energy in you. And then finally, you stay there for yourself because you've done a great job. So I know creativity, amazing ways of feting the seniors and eighth graders, all sorts of things, but it is a loss. So again, what are we learning from it and what do we want to do? So I've been inspired by a quote from Mother Stuart, and she wrote this one day: life is an arduous journey, a great undertaking, not a little or easy thing. Sing every way you can. God gave song to give heart and courage and joy to life. If not with the voice, sing with the spirit and with understanding, with high thoughts and spiritual ambitions. Remember that whatever happens, you must say to yourself, according to circumstances, joyfully and thankfully, or humbly and submissively, or bravely, or if need be, defiantly, to the troubles within. This is part of the story of God's love for you. So I don't begin to imagine exactly what this story that we're all living together has for each of us, but I am absolutely convinced that it is one of those moments that historians will write about. Many of our stories will not make it into the history books. Our stories of courage, our stories of confidence, our stories of generosity. But we will know those stories, and we will know that our capacity to act with hope, to be beacons of light, to really exhibit the courage and confidence Sophie expected of all of us, educators and students of the Sacred Heart, parents of the Sacred Heart. We will know those stories. So in spite of the suffering and the loss, in spite of the uncertainty, in spite of the kind of confusion and an unconscious grieving for what has been, let us really figure out a way to help one another focus what can be. What will it be? What will this future be that we are creating today? Because it's the choices we're making today that will affect tomorrow. We know that. We've lived that in the past. I think Mother Stuart had such a profound sense of joy. And for her, she could find joy in nature. Look at the setting of Stuart. The sheer beauty of it, that's one of the things I remember. Coming out of what was then the middle school office, things have changed since I was there, but especially early in the morning when the deer would come a little bit closer. Can't do it now because of the science wing, but back then they could come a little bit closer to where the middle school director's office was. And just standing still to watch them. Or spring at Stuart, oh my gosh, those dogwood. There's nothing like that. So the sheer beauty Mother Stuart understood was a window into the joy that we have the capacity for. But she was no coward. She also knew great suffering. And she knew that if we could attend to it, if we could be present in the midst of it, in the end, we would come forward. She often wrote, joy comes from suffering. It's an odd thing, but it is not an odd conviction if one has a belief in the divine presence or transcendence or God, Christ, the Holy Spirit, however you name our Creator. There is something going on in the midst of our world through this pandemic that, God willing, is awakening in us in a deeper way a sensitivity to our common humanity. As I've read Patty's letters to the community, and as I've watched videos or seeing descriptions of your classes, what I see at Stuart is the community reaching out to help one another. I see genuine sensitivity on the part of the teachers working with their students. I see a desire on the part of students to really demonstrate to themselves, to their parents, to their teachers, we can do this. We're strong women of the Sacred Heart. We're going to be okay. We still have a lot to learn. We want to do it. I see a community that's so alive and so committed to demonstrating that all the values that Stuart claims as a independent Catholic Sacred Heart girls' school, that all that's true. And how is it evident? It's evident in the daily choices you're making. And for that, I am so grateful to you as a religious of the Sacred Heart. We hope that this mission is real. We hope that the partnership with parents and educators of the Sacred Heart will benefit the students of the Sacred Heart. But in the midst of all of this confusion, of this loss, of this uncertainty, we are seeing signs of life. We are seeing evidence of joy. We are seeing that this is worth it. So I don't think that it's a question of not experiencing the Easter season. I think we're experiencing it in a whole new way. I think we need to remember that the first Easter was a day of confusion. I learned this I was working on a prayer, and I saw something Stuart Hall and Convent in San Francisco did over the Triduum. And I was really impressed by the wisdom of claiming and reminding all of us that that first Easter morning was madness. It was heartbreaking. It was confusing. It was disappointing. It was frightening. And yet, how did they manage getting through it? Together as a community, by honoring their relationship. Today, we see Easter, no matter what our faith tradition is, we recognize Easter, as did Andrea Bocelli, as a day that celebrates hope, a day that celebrates forgiveness and redemption, a day that celebrates new life. It's a day that reminds us, when we reflect on our lives, that some of the most positive developments in our lives didn't always feel like victories in the immediate moment. At the time that the thing was happening, it was sometimes sad. It was sometimes disappointing. It was sometimes like, are you kidding me? It was infuriating. And yet, we know that while everything doesn't always make sense in the moment, in time, with careful reflection and a little bit of life, we can see significance and meaning in that kind of moment. So I think the choice we have to make has to do with, how do we integrate both joy and sorrow, loss and birth, Easter and the pandemic? How do we integrate that as we move forward? How do we, knowing that this is a kind of new normal that we may not like, how do we bring forward those things we've been missing, that we long to return to? How do we discern that that's worth the choice? How do we, with confidence, let go of the stuff that we know, really was never important? We thought it was, but it wasn't. So it's okay to let go of. And how do we creatively and thoughtfully bring into our future these things we've discovered about ourselves, about each other? And how do we celebrate that? So what habits and practices have we developed in our coping with this are really life-giving, and therefore we want to keep it when we are back to quote unquote normal. Tomorrow, the Holy Father has invited us to a day of prayer, fasting, and performing works of charity. In a letter to the church, he said, "Since prayer is a universal value, I have accepted the proposal of the Higher Committee of Human Fraternity for Believers of all religions to unite spiritually on the 14th of May, which is tomorrow, for a day of prayer, fasting, and works of charity, to implore God to help humanity overcome the pandemic." So my prayer for the Stuart community is that you continue to grow in the confidence that you have discovered in new, brilliant, creative ways, that you continue to demonstrate the courage that are rooted in the values of Sacred Heart education, that you continue to show the compassion for yourselves, for each other, for the students, for the families that have been so evident in these last 2 months of this new pedagogical practice that we used to talk about, distant learning, that now has become a way of life. And that you really celebrate with hope that the future is emerging from the reality of today, and that we are the architects or the artisans of hope by the daily choices we make. So now I'd like to open it up for questions or comments.
Sister Cooke, it's Kristen. I just wanted to say thank you so much. I think I wrote down something you said, which was, who do we want to be when we emerge from this? And I think that's something that I think as we're moving forward, not only is it who do we want to be as individuals, but like who do we want to be as a school, and coming back to the things that we care about most, and what are the things that we're not willing to sacrifice because we're so true to who we are no matter what. And I think we've done that virtually at this point, but I think that's just, I'm going to add that to my quote board, basically, is what I'm saying. It's words of wisdom. So
yeah, and I hope that you will take some time, which I realize I have less time than I've ever had in my life. So much for physical isolation being a moment of contemplation. I'm so busy, but I hope you will take some time individually and as a community to consider what's been terrific about this. What has been grace-filled about this experience? I know it sounds crazy because you're exhausted, but I'm a little worried that exhaustion will prevent the reflection and you might lose something. Because reflecting in the moment gives us some insight, and then reflection in time in the future will give us other insight. But don't lose what you're really enjoying right now, in spite of all. And believe me, I know it's been hard. So I don't mean to paint it into this rosy, wonderful picture. It's been really, really hard, and it's going to continue to be hard. But there have been some glorious moments. Others?
Can I share something that I learned this morning? It's Anna Hopeno. I was speaking this morning with exchange coordinators, and we did the Faces of the Heart 2 years ago. And we learned that the 46 students did a Zoom meeting together without any input of us. I mean, we didn't know, and we just learned from Facebook. And from all over, from New Zealand, Australia, Japan, Peru, everywhere, they found a time to be together on a huge Zoom. And this speaks to our really foundation of being Sacred Heart people. And that's, I mean, I was almost in tears when I saw that. And I will share with you the small excerpt of the article that they wrote. But I just wanted to share that.
Thank you. I think that's a wonderful example of what it is that does, in a good way, differentiate us as members of this family of the Sacred Heart. It is remember, courage is a choice of the heart. And the French root of the word courage has to do with heart. So I think the engagement of hearts has been significant. So thank you for sharing that.
Suzanne, I just wanted to share that I think one of the things I've been reflecting on is the history of the Society of the Sacred Heart over the years. And, you know, when I think that I'm most down, I recall that, you know, Sophie started this on the heels of the French Revolution. You know, Janet Erskine Stuart and Rose Philippine Duchesne survived many a pandemic. There were awesome obstacles all along the way, and still they survived and still they thrived. And I think sometimes when we think, oh my gosh, how are we ever going to get out of this? It's good to put that historical perspective on it, that we've managed a lot of things in the past, and always believed that especially young women would be the way to move forward. So I'm inspired by that.
That's great. And Stuart is one of the younger schools, so we don't have archives from the influenza epidemic of 1918. But some of the schools that do trace their history back to then, Lynn Ozick, who's the archivist, has helped them find archives from that time. And it's exactly what you're saying, Patty. In spite of the challenge of going from, in one case, it was 160 boarders to 12 within a week. And it all had to do with the realization that the epidemic, they were trying to flee the epidemic. And so families came and got their daughters and tried to get to places that they thought would be safer, quote unquote, not realizing the epidemic would spread throughout it was throughout the world, but in this case, the United States. And yet they returned a year later and they had more students. And it was the way people had helped one another. The word went out. And I think we need to remember that. That's why telling your story and watching what you're doing with video and your website of some of your alumni and some of the choices they're making, that's very encouraging to see that when push comes to shove, these adults that have been formed by you all have become active artisans of hope. But you do need to take care of yourself. I quoted that that talk from the Superior General of the Jesuits, but he goes on to say it was a worldwide Zoom with, I don't know how they did that with so many time zones, but anyway, he really said to them, we've got to be attentive to the apostolate of care of self, care of one another. And if you don't take care of yourself, you can't take care of others. So I also hope that in spite of all of this pressure, that if you have not yet figured out a practice of self-care, that you develop one soon, because we can't keep this pace up without attentiveness to self. And that's not selfish. That's actually an act of generosity, to be mindful of your need to care for your inner life, your physical life, the life of the soul, the life of the mind. So I'm trusting you know that.
Well, I wanted to share with you that I don't know if you have your phone near you, Suzanne,
Yes.
but you should check the text I just sent you, because your comment about seeing the deer in the back, I sent her the picture of Tony's picture of the little fawn right by the science wing. Just yesterday.
Wow. Now, here's a sign of life. That's fantastic.
So they're still coming to Stuart.
Wow. That's great.
Thank you again for being with us, Suzanne. It's been so wonderful. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. And thank you for letting us record it, because I know there were a lot of people that wanted to hear what you had to say, but couldn't be at this particular time. So thank you so much.